So today I'm going to be taking a look at a brand I don't think a lot of people know about. I definitely haven't been aware of this brand until maybe a couple months ago. So it's called Ophion. I think they're based out of Singapore mainly, and they create a very interesting watch. They're mainly aimed at kind of maybe like that Ming and Fierce type territory where it's very like boutique micro brand status. They create some very interesting designs, and let's get into it and see what it's all about. So we have a diameter of 38.9, lug to lug of 46.5, height of 10.9, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other general specifications for this watch, we're going to have the Soprod / Techno Time, I believe it's called the H718. I'll correct it if that's not the actual reference number, but it has this kind of customized finger bridge style from Ophion themselves, a little bit of a customized movement. Take it or leave it in the design aspect, but I think it does look pretty cool, just pretty uniquely architectured. This does come with a 5-day power reserve, and I've tested it to about 5.5 days, which is awesome. I'm not sure of the beat rate, so I'll put that there. And overall, I've been getting an accuracy of about -1 to +4 seconds a day over that entire 5-day span. We also have a domed sapphire crystal here, very slightly domed with inner AR, or with AR coating rather, on both the inside and the outside. We have 50 meters of stated water resistance without a screw down crown, just a regular push-pull. And this watch also retails for basically 2,950 euros, which with conversion, that's about $3,500. And that's for the guilloche version. They also do kind of like a more sunray, sunburst version that is 2,660 euros, so about a $300 difference. So moving into the dial of this watch, and it is very much a super interesting point of the watch, and probably one of the main reasons you'll be getting this one, or at least the reason you'll be spending an extra $300 to spring for the guilloche version. Now, Ophion's kind of claim to fame with this dial is they have this kind of guilloche CNC machined dial here, and it's kind of like a hybrid between a stamping process and an actual rose turn engine process. So it gives a somewhat more unique depth than a regular stamping process would, but it's not quite as sharp and as apparent as a regular guilloche. And I'd say that's probably true, but overall I think it does look good. At some angles it can look very flat and it doesn't really pop out to you very much, but when it does pop out, it does look pretty nice. Looking at the rest of the dial just more generally, as we can see, we have brigade numerals all along the outside. We also have this kind of metal applique on the inner ring and the outer ring and outer kind of railroad minute track there. We can see that this inner ring here is actually beveled on both sides, which is a pretty nice touch. Ophion written in plain text there in a very almost brigade-like style, with this kind of like Ophion little logo at the 6 o'clock, which adds a nice balance, and I do appreciate that being there. We also have this very pointed arrow-like hour hand, which is where this model gets its name from, the Ophion Velos, and Velos means arrow in Greek. So pretty beautiful handset in my opinion. I think it looks really nice with the overall design. It matches the aesthetic really, really well. I think it really pairs nicely with the brigade numerals. And I do just really like the dial design overall. I think the numerals are done beautifully. They're cut very nicely. They're very, very prominent. And my one gripe with the numerals is that in this kind of static angle where you're just looking at it straight on, it's 90% of the time in this kind of blackened state, which is unfortunate because not only does that kind of hinder actual legibility, but it just doesn't look as good when it's like shining brightly and just kind of popping out really nicely. And it is really beautiful once these numerals actually pop out at you because they are so well designed, so well formed, but when they are all blackened out, it lessens the experience a little bit. Overall, I think it's a really beautifully done dial. The texture is very nice, a little bit subtle. I would have preferred maybe a bigger kind of guilloche grain, but it is good. It looks beautiful. Really, really love those numerals. I'm a sucker for brigade numerals. Look at those. Really well balanced. They didn't put any text they didn't need on the dial, and they just kind of let the dial work shine for itself. So zooming in quite a bit closer here, we can see that that guilloche pattern is really nicely done, really just nicely defined, all those kind of interlocking squares there. I believe when I was talking to the brand owner, he said each dial, at least the guilloche versions, take about 2 hours to make through the CNC machining process. So this is undoubtedly a kind of hand-finished, very artisanal kind of process, even though it might not be to the level of something like road engine turning, but it still does get that kind of effect going. Looking at this nice brushed Ophion logo, there is a little bit of kind of like roughness in the metal there. Something I would probably like to be polished up a little bit, but it doesn't look too bad by any means. A little bit of maybe of an imperfection near the H there, but I've never noticed it from the wrist. Nice sharp bevel to the end there. I think they do mention it's a machine beveling, but either way, it still adds a nice little relief to the watch, a nice kind of just point of interest. But I think if we turn it to the side here, we can see there is kind of a little bit of dirtiness, some dustiness to that overall machining edge. So you can't expect perfection, especially because this is a very boutique brand at a fairly reasonable price, all things considered. But just something to note there. Beautifully shaped and curved hour hand, as we see there. Really, really nice. I really love the handset on this watch. And then just really quickly taking a look at those numerals. As you can see, they have a lot of just surface area on the top, so they do catch light really well. They have a good amount of depth to them. There is a lot of depth overall to this whole dial, but these numerals in particular, again, they go black very often, and I think it does detract from the watch a little bit. I think to combat that, they could have added a little bit of a curved surface to the top of the numerals or added some beveling along the sides to just kind of give them a little bit more visual breakup, and when it's all black, at least some parts are still shining. And then again, metal applied outer railroad track here. I think a little bit better finished than the inner track is here. Overall, really well done dial here. Not really many complaints, not really many imperfections either. Maybe just some slight brushing issues and some slight polishing issues, but a lot of it is machine done. So you're gonna kind of expect it at that kind of level of finish quality. But from what I can see, at least from, quote unquote bird's eye view, from wrist view, it does look perfectly well done. Pretty nice on macro inspection too, so really can't complain. And right before we move on, one thing I just wanted to note about this guilloche dial, because these squares are kind of going in opposite directions from each other, they catch light in separate ways. So as you can see, when some of them are lit up, other ones are darker. So it gives this kind of nice bicolor effect at certain angles. Well, at certain angles, of course, it goes kind of all in this general matted blue. And at that point, it can look a little bit plain, a little bit boring because the texture really doesn't come out. But at these off angles, you can really see the texture come to life and play, and that is really fun. So moving on to the case of this watch, and this is probably the most interesting part of the watch, maybe. I mean, this watch does have a lot of interesting things going on about it, but the case is made in collaboration with the same case making company, I believe owned by or run by Kari Voutilainen. So very high-end watchmaker, makes usually pretty similar case styles to this, and this is a very kind of Kari reminiscent case. I think it is just a really, really beautiful case shape. Not only is the design itself just cool, but it also just like sculpted nicely. It has a nice continuous flow from kind of the bottom of the lug here up to the top. Nice little dome gently to the crystal here. So it all flows really nicely together. It has a lot of circular elements, and there's not really a lot of harshness to the case. It's very sweeping, it's very beautiful, it's very gentle, and I do like that. As we can see here, we have kind of a general midsection here with a kind of inlaid bezel on top and case back on bottom. And one kind of just note is that these two sections protrude slightly out from the mid case. And it's not something you really notice, but in hand you do feel it, and it's kind of an interesting feel. Not bad by any means, just different, unique, something that just kind of adds to the design, and something that kind of is a very small detail that you may not notice, but just kind of comes together to make the watch even cooler than you would initially expect. Very nice, kind of just general flat styled crown here. No signatures or anything. Pretty good knurling. It is a hand wound movement, so you're gonna want to be able to operate this crown pretty well, and you can. Easy to wind, easy to grip. One thing I will note about the movement, since we are kind of talking about it, is that again we have a 5-day power reserve, but it doesn't have any kind of limit to how much you can wind it. You can wind it pretty much for infinity, and then once you reach the end, you hear a kind of differential click to the movement, and that tells you it's fully wound. But thankfully, there's no actual threat of overwinding it and actually snapping anything within the movement, which is really nice at this price point. Zooming into the movement here, and this again is customized to Ophion specification. It is kind of a base movement that they've created their own bridges for to kind of mimic this finger style that is more reminiscent of pocket watches. It has a kind of beautiful, just general aesthetic look to it, and overall, I'm not a huge fan of the hand-hammered finishing on the actual plates or the bridges here. I think it does kind of cheapen the overall look. I'm not saying they should have went with a perlage, but this is a kind of almost rough and utilitarian look to the movement, whereas the actual dial side itself is very, very beautiful, very, very polished. So I do think they're out of contrast slightly with each other. But overall, really nice looking movement. There is some kind of bubbling on the kind of gears there. So not the most perfectly finished, but it is really well done, all things considered. Some machine chamfering there. Pretty good to look at, honestly. And then before we move on, just the general case back, one thing I would like to note is that they do say 70% Swiss and 30% German, and that's just kind of a nod to the fact that they're very transparent about where everything comes from. The dial is made in Germany, the movement, the case, and I believe the hands are all made in Switzerland, so that's where the kind of breakup of the percentage comes from. And yeah, it's just overall a really cool case, really cool design. Overall, very slim, all things considered, and it does wear nicely on wrist, pretty short lug to lug. Really just uniquely tailored to this watch. It is something that you kind of don't see at this price point. It's a kind of case style, case shape that kind of feels very high-end, and it's nice to be getting it at a not necessarily overly high-end price. So moving on to how the watch wears. Earlier, I was wearing this SUF collaboration with Neighborhood Watch Club. Really, really cool watch here. And here we have the Ophion sitting on my 6.5-inch wrist. And even though it is a slightly large diameter of almost 39 millimeters, it wears really well for its size. It is very much a just plain circle sitting on the wrist with these pretty short teardrop lugs. So it gives a kind of feel and just weight on the wrist that you're not used to. It looks great in my opinion. You kind of have to just be okay with this almost pseudo scarab-like case, this teardrop lug style. It definitely ends up looking a lot different than a traditional case shape does. So it's just something to keep in mind. Overall though, I think it wears really, really comfortably. It is almost 11 millimeters thick, but it wears its thickness really well. Those lugs really do come to meet pretty much below the case back. So it ends up wearing very, very close to the wrist. There's no really sharp edges on the watch either, so any flexion isn't really met with any discomfort or anything like that. So it really is a very pleasurable wearing experience. And as you can see here, this is what I was talking about, where the kind of Ophion tends to lean to this very black numeral state. But once you start tilting off axis, you start seeing those numerals light up and shine. And I mean, when they start shining, it really is a gorgeous, gorgeous look to it. And even when it's only kind of half lit up, it's just a really beautiful look, and you get the guilloche that comes out to play. Overall, very fun watch to play with in the light. Very nicely wearing watch. One thing to note, this is not the original strap. This is just a cheapest NATO strap. If I bring in the original strap, it's really nothing to write home about. A kind of just regular plain padded calf leather. Not the highest quality. I would definitely just switch it out for something else. Not bad. I don't love the way the blues go together either, so not the best strap choice in my opinion, but a little bit better than the usual OEM. Moving on to a blue strap you should get if you get this watch, and this is the Distressed Leather by Vario, and I think it pairs really, really nicely. It kind of plays off the blue themes of the watch dial here. This distressed look gives it a kind of more casual feel. Looks really good in my opinion, and I just really like it, yeah. And there we have it on wrist. Again, very, very comfortable case shape to wear overall. Pretty sleek wearing, and yeah, that's the Vario strap. Next, a little bit more of an untraditional watch pairing, or strap pairing rather. This is a cork strap by Watch Gecko. They don't make the strap anymore, unfortunately, but you can kind of just look online for just other vendors that have similar cork style straps. I think it adds a really cool texture to the watch, not that the watch isn't textured already. The brown tones or the tan tones really match the blue really well, and yeah, just dig it. And there we have it on wrist, a lot more casual of a look, casual of a feel, nice and bright, so yeah, cool combo here. And then here we have a one-piece leather NATO from Benchmark straps. There we have it on wrist, nicely plants the watch. I think the colors go really well together. Thankfully the watch is thin enough to where kind of a single pass watch strap or a NATO doesn't look too bulky on it, so pretty cool combo here. And last but not least, the Archer silicone strap from Amazon. Of course, put it on everything. A nice fun pairing, makes it a lot brighter and a lot less serious. There we have it on wrist. I think it looks good. Again, off axis is where this watch really shines the most. Pretty good looking combo in my opinion, a little bit bright, so maybe not for everybody, but I like it, I dig it, and I wore it on this a good amount. So pros and cons of this watch, and I did have kind of a very love-hate relationship with this watch, and I'll explain more in kind of like the summary. But starting with the pros, and I think the watch, if nothing else, is very unique. It has a look that you won't find anywhere near this price point. It has kind of just beautiful design elements, the metal applications on it, the beautifully shaped hour hand, the movement that's used, which you kind of just don't see used in anything. It has a lot of unique, quirky aspects to it, and it feels different. It doesn't feel like every other watch. It doesn't feel derivative. It just is itself. I mean, of course, there's inspiration from Kari Voutilainen in his cases, but still, it's made by the same case company, so maybe they can get away with that a little bit. And then kind of adding on to that point, there's a lot of great attention to detail and quality here. The markers are polished amazingly well, as well as the hands. They shine amazingly. There's a nice drastic black polish happening. It is not necessarily to the point of, like, let's say Zaratsu, but it's pretty close. It is very well done considering this is a very kind of almost small brand working at a kind of quote-unquote aggressive price point in comparison to some of the luxury players out there. And last but not least, I think that in the end it is a great value for what you're getting. It is a very almost artisanally made watch. They're not in high production numbers. There's a lot of kind of detail and attention going into the watch itself. I believe the dials take about an hour or so to make for the guilloche. So this isn't just a quick, stamp it out, get it built, and then ship it off to the customer. It is a little bit more boutique, a little bit more handmade than that. And I think considering the quality of all the things made on this watch, the case shape, the uniqueness of the wearing experience, the movement that you get at this price point where you'd be comparing it to brands like Tudor and maybe like vintage Rolex and I don't even, Omega, yeah. There's not really a lot else out there that kind of plays along this same kind of just look, aesthetic, and feel that this watch gives off, which I think is definitely a benefit for the watch. Now moving on to the cons, and my biggest con is going to be the way the numerals are polished. And I don't know if it's the polish itself, I don't know if it's the shape of the numerals, I don't know what it is, but the black polish doesn't have the right, I guess, shift point or whatever you would call it. It is black at a point where I think it shouldn't be. And the times that it goes towards that black polish, it ends up looking very muted, it ends up looking very dark, and it doesn't seem right to me. There needs to be more curve to the numeral so that it isn't always blackened out. There needs to be maybe some beveling or some like kind of like a partitioning of the shape more, like, have a actual like more geometric numeral. It just is beautifully polished. It shines well in the light, and when you have it shine in the correct way, it looks gorgeous. It's just the fact that at times where I'm looking dead on at the watch and it's like all the numerals are completely black and the hands are slightly black as well, it not only hinders legibility, but it hinders my enjoyment of the watch, because I feel like at that angle that I'm looking at it, it should be of a silver tone and more easily read than when I tilt off axis and then it goes silver. I think it should be the other way around, where it's black off axis more and then more silver dead on. Another con for the watch is I think the blue is slightly muted. This is a completely personal taste, and I think it might just be because the texture of the guilloche is so small that I pay attention to the color itself more. And the color is very much matte, it's very much a darker blue, and I would have preferred either a brighter blue, a slightly glossier blue, or a bigger texture. Something that would make the watch slightly more stand outish, slightly more interesting. I think they already have a very kind of prominent and unique design for the numerals and the kind of handset and all that, but I think the color needs to be a little bit more interesting. I mean, they have their salmon variation, which is a little cool, but I think the blue needs a little bit more love. And last but not least, you may not like the case. I do love it, and I think it is a very cool case. It wears very differently than a traditional circular case does because of those beveled lugs, because of the very, very prominent circular mid case. And it's just a matter of kind of course, trying one on if you can, but if not, just buying it and hoping you like it, because it wears differently, it looks differently, it gives a different feel on wrist than a traditional case shape does. And some may like it, some may not. It's a little bit more design forward than the traditional case shape because we've been using similar designs to like the Oyster case and these more sporty designs for the past 100 years or so. So people aren't necessarily used to this more dressy case style, and maybe if you are more into dressier watches like me, it won't be too much of a shock to you. But if that's something that may be a barrier of entry for you for this watch, it's something to consider because the case shape is kind of like the main reason you'll be buying this. Final thoughts on the watch, and again, as I said earlier, it's a love-hate for me. I think it is amazingly well made. You get what they're trying to go for, which is a high-end feel for not an extremely high-end price. And they execute that extremely well. It is a great package. I think the actual box, I think the fact that it comes with like these like A3 prints of the watch is amazing. But there are some design executions that I think are lackluster in a way. They can be improved, undoubtedly. Again, the numerals, just kind of maybe a little bit quality of life adjustments to, you know, the watch. If they would have made it slightly smaller, I would have preferred it more because it is a very dressy style, and I think it would have been more at home in a 37 or a 36 millimeter case. Now, that's not for everybody, and I'm sure the 39 appeals to a wider audience, but this kind of feel, I think, works better in a smaller size. But overall, it is a very cool watch. It's very unique, and if it's something you're kind of looking for, something that's off the beaten path, something a little bit more dressy, because most watches in this price point are just going to be generally well-made sports watches. You got like the Planet Ocean, not the Planet Ocean, but the Seamaster from Omega. You got like the Tudor with its like Pelagos and the Black Bay family. You got some offerings from Grand Seiko, a little higher and a little lower in this price point, which kind of compete a little bit more. And then you got on the same boutique edge brand, maybe Fears. But I think the Ophion wins out a little bit more because the design's more unique and the movement is just better and cooler, and it has that 5-day power reserve, which is really awesome. Whereas the Fears is using that ETA movement, which is, although it's not bad, I think it's just a boring choice. And it's not well integrated into the design. But overall, again, back to this watch, it's a great watch. I enjoyed my time with it, but it's not for me because, again, those small little flaws were things I was able to get over. But if those flaws aren't a big deal for you, it is a gorgeously made watch, and I definitely look forward to what they have in the future, because if they correct those small little things, I might be buying an Ophion again because it still is a very cool watch. Thank you for watching. I hope you got something out of the video, and I'll see you in another one.